Caroline makes it a point to walk multiple mornings a week, I guess because she's a show-off. But Fridays generally are my day off, and so in recent weeks I have tried to walk with her because, I'm fat. And anyway, not this Friday, but the previous week, I was going to walk with her, and we had gone to Gibson Park, which is just off of Wendover, and that particular park I like a lot because if you've never walked the trail there, it kind of winds along the creek back and forth, and it's just really pretty through there. Anyway, she knew that I liked that one, so that's the one that we went to. Anyway, we had been in the process of trying to sell our 15-passenger van with Nathan being off at college. Andrew has his driver's license. Philip has his permit. It's so infrequent that all 8 of us ride together anyway. And it just didn't make sense to keep maintaining a vehicle and paying property tax and insurance on this big vehicle. And so we decided to sell it. So I had listed it on Facebook Marketplace. Anyway, on this particular Friday morning, we get out at the park, and we're getting ready to get on the trail, and my phone just starts lighting up, and people are they're asking me questions, and so we're getting ready to go on the trail, and I said, hold on just a second, and Caroline is growing impatient as I keep responding to these things, and she said, well, let's go, and I said, I'm doing business, and so anyway, I finished those responses, and then we begin to walk, and I've got a smartwatch, and so it starts buzzing, and so I can tell I've got something, and Nancy had texted me, so I respond to that, and so we've stopped again, and then I get a response from somebody else on Facebook, and I stop to respond to that, and then a church member called, and I'm seeing what that voicemail is, and then there's another email that comes in, and I stop to do that, and finally Caroline said, listen, just stop it. Like, you can do this, like, wait an hour, and you can do all that stuff the rest of the day, but just this hour, let's just walk. Okay. And so then we just walk. And as we're walking, you can hear the water, and you can hear the birds, and you get close to Wendover, and you can hear the traffic, and you can there's all of these sights and sounds and all this quiet and all this stuff that you get to take in. And so at that point, as a good wife, she rubs my nose in it, and she says, see, you are about to miss all of this because of your phone. Because of your phone. And it is true, especially with the years that continue to pass and the increases in technology, that our phones are becoming increasingly, and technology is becoming an increasing distraction to life. And there is so much that is going on around us that is real and is meaningful, and we are missing it because we're so distracted by these devices. And it is not merely that we are missing out because we're distracted by devices. In truth, I suppose you could argue we're distracted by almost anything, aren't we? I mean, there's a noise, and we're distracted by that. There's a cricket. There's all kinds of stuff. And you could argue, and some people more than others, we're distracted by almost and virtually any and everything. And while there is truth in that, there are some things that we are more prone to be distracted by. And this is particularly true when it relates to our relationship with the Lord. Now, we've been thinking about, and we're continuing to work our way, and we're near the end of this, though, working our way through Matthew and dropping in at different points where people have these encounters with Jesus, and where what could be experienced, and in truth what should have been experienced, is lost. It's a missed opportunity. What we're calling these are missed calls, and they miss them. And today we're going to see them. They miss these opportunities because they are distracted. And as these individuals and collectively they are distracted, we can see some very common things that ultimately distract us. In fact, that's the question we're going to think about today. What are some of the things that that easily distract us from Jesus. And if we can pay attention to those things, then maybe we won't be those that are missing out on these opportunities with Jesus. Look with me in your Bibles today to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16, starting with verse 1. There we're told that the Pharisees and the Sadducees approached and they tested Jesus, asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, "When evening comes, you say, 'It will be good weather because the sky is red.' In the morning, today will be stormy because the sky is red and threatening. You know how to read the appearance of the sky, but you can't read the signs of the time. An evil and adulterous generation demands a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah." Then he left them and went away. Then the disciples reached the other shore, and they had forgotten to take bread. And Jesus told them, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." And they were discussing among themselves, we didn't bring any bread. Aware of this, Jesus said, "You of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves that you did not have bread? Don't you understand yet? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you collected? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many large baskets you collected? Why is it that you don't understand when I told you, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? It wasn't about bread." Then they understood that he had not told them to beware of the leaven in bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. All right, so we've got not just the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but ultimately the disciples also are missing what could have been and should have been this experience with Jesus. And this is instructive for us as we have this passage recorded for us, because it shows us some of the things, at least categorically, that easily distract us from Jesus. Well, what are those things? Well, first of all, I would say this: I can be so easily distracted by me. I can be so easily distracted by me, and you can be so easily distracted by you. What does that mean? Let's unpack this together for a moment. So in verse 1, we're told that the Pharisees and the Sadducees approached and they tested Jesus. All right, so it is consequential that these two groups have come together, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But it says that they have come, and they have approached Jesus seeking to test him. And it says they are asking him to show them a sign from heaven. Now, sometimes the word test is used, or we might use the word test as in to say, I have just rewired this lamp. I'm going to test to see if it works, if I connected everything properly. Sometimes the New Testament may use the word or a word that conveys that thought. This particular word that is used does not convey that thought. It specifically means to test with the intent on failure. So they are aiming, and Matthew uses a word here that conveys the idea that they are intending on tripping up Jesus. They have no interest in success. They are trying to stump Jesus. They are trying to trip him up. And so it says the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they approach and they are asking for a sign from heaven, but they really don't want a sign. They're looking for something to cause him to stumble, something to cause him to fail. But this is an unusual experience where you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees together, even though we have these two groups mentioned a number of times in the Gospels, that many times we don't pay attention to how unusual it is to see them together. These two groups of people don't like each other, even though collectively they are considered the religious leadership of the day. Now, but between the two, you've got the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And generally speaking, they don't like each other, and they don't work together under normal circumstances. In fact, you might even argue they pretty well hate each other. They viewed each other as competitors. But they differed on some meaningful issues. To begin with, they differed theologically. This reminds us that our beliefs translate into actions. And one of the things that they differed on was belief about eternal life. The Pharisees believed in life after death. The Sadducees didn't. I remember as a kid in Sunday school, I've told you this before. The easy way to remember that is this. The Sadducees did not believe in life after death. They were sad, you see. So that's how you can remember that. Anyway, so that's a huge difference, and it affected how they did things. And so the Sadducees, they were a smaller group of Jews, but they were also among the wealthiest class of Jews in the first century. And if you are thinking and you're operating under the notion or the pretense that this life is all that there is, well, then you're going to be thinking very differently. And they were consumed very much with material things because you might as well enjoy it now. After all, this life is all that you've got. And very interested in accumulating and gaining political influence and political power and using the wealth that you have to enjoy yourself, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. Again, their beliefs very much affected their actions. And you could very much argue that theirs was an existence that was characterized by self-indulgence. Now, while that might have been true of the Sadducees, it wasn't true of the Pharisees. The Pharisees, in fact, the name itself means that they were the separated ones. They were killjoys, and they had not met a rule that they didn't love. And they loved rules, and they relished rules. And they loved rules because rules made them feel really good about themselves. And it wasn't just adherence to the Mosaic Law. They liked to add to that. And they had all of these traditions and all these excessive detailed rules that they had added to the rabbinical law. And so they would add all of these rules, and that would lead them, by maintaining these rules and all of that rigor, to look down on everyone else who didn't do this. And so they were a very haughty, a very snooty group that was looking down on everyone else. And they felt so good about themselves because they were maintaining all of these rules, and they felt so wonderful about themselves, and there was going to be life that was experienced after this life, and it had everything to do with them maintaining the rules and checking all the boxes. And so you could say that theirs was an existence that wasn't characterized by self-indulgence. It was characterized by self-righteousness. It was characterized by self-righteousness. And so you have these two groups that are working together, and they're polar opposites. They don't like each other. One is interested in political power, and the other one's concerned about rules. One is living, thinking about enjoying the moment, and one thinks that there is eternal life. Very different. They don't like each other, but they have what they view as a common threat. And so the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they start working now together. And so they come as a unified front to Jesus, and it sounds as though they are asking for something very spiritual. They say, "Give us a sign from heaven." Might there be something that you could do that would indicate, that would grant some sort of authentication of your ministry, of your authority? You know, crowds are lining up to hear you speak. There's all of this stuff that is swirling around you. And almost certainly within the Pharisees and within the Sadducees, they had not only heard through the grapevine about the stuff that Jesus had done, almost certainly within these numbers, people had seen with their own eyes Jesus talking to people, Jesus performing actual miracles. They had seen this, but now they're like, we need you to do something. We need you to do something. And Jesus says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. In fact, the only sign that you're going to get is the sign of Jonah, which is an appeal to something that he said back in chapter 10. And what's that? And back there he said, as Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days in the heart of the earth. He's saying to them, they don't get it, they have no idea at this point, but he's saying the only sign that you're going to get is the resurrection. You want your sign? The resurrection is going to be your sign. I'm not giving you anything else. You've had plenty, but you're not interested. You don't want this at all. You're not interested in me demonstrating anything of consequence to you. You don't want to hear it. You don't want to see it. There has been plenty that has been demonstrated, but you have shown up and you don't want to see me. You don't want to hear me. You don't want to actually encounter me, because the only thing that you actually are interested in is your own self-indulgence or your own self-righteousness. Now, you can look at this and say, well, what does that have to do with me? I'm not a Pharisee. I'm not a Sadducee. Those groups don't even exist today. Well, if you have a group that's interested in self-indulgence or self-righteousness, what do those have in common? Self. At the end of the day, that is still ensnaring people, which is to say that there are so many times that we can miss opportunities to have an encounter with Christ where He does something of meaning and significance, but we completely miss that because we are so focused on ourselves. And like the Pharisees or like the Sadducees, we think about ourselves, and self is pretty good. I'm kind of okay. We're not thinking about what Jesus actually wants. We're not thinking about plans and purposes and aspirations that He might actually have, ways in which He might actually transform us and our spheres of influence. We don't care anything about that. We're just so wrapped up in thinking about, well, me. You know, as I look back, I don't know if there's 1,000, there might be 1,000,000 different ways in which I have never been cool. But I'm okay with that, and at this point, certainly I own it. But one of the ways that, looking back, that I know that I was not cool was in elementary and junior high school, my love of CB radios. And I don't know if that was because of the influence of Dukes of Hazzard back in the day, but and kids today, CB radios, I'm like, what in the world? So maybe you have to go look it up on your cell phone. But anyway, I mean, I was so cool that not only, I started with a CB radio walkie-talkie, pull the antenna out. I could probably hit Karen with it from here. It was awesome. It took 8 AA batteries. I mean, it was awesome. Later, I got a CB base station. I mean, that was a big deal. And my CB handle was Dead Dog. And I have no idea where I came up with that. But I remember my first foray into CB radios was with that walkie-talkie that I got. And I got it for Christmas. And I was so super excited to have gotten that thing that year. And the channel I wanted to listen to, the channel I wanted to get on was Channel 19. That's the Truckers channel. And so finally, and it stinks though, because on Christmas there's not a whole lot of truckers out there. Anyway, but I get it on Channel 19. I can hear a little bit of chatter through all that static. I get on there, and I know what to say. Breaker, breaker, 19. Anybody got your ears on? I'm like in 4th grade, or I don't know, whatever it is. I had rehearsed this. I knew what to say. I had it down. Yeah, I got my ears on. So they say, who is this? I say, you got the Dead Dog. All right, so now it's my turn. So I've called out for somebody. Somebody's called back. Now what? Breaker, breaker, 19. You got your ears on? Lost sheep shepherd? Breaker, breaker, 1. I had nothing to say. I mean, literally nothing to say. I had no idea what to ask. I had no idea what to talk about. I mean, I knew absolutely nothing except a little bit of breaker, breaker, 19, a little bit of 10-4, what's your 20, a little bit of nonsense. But All I knew was that little bit, and all it was that. And breaker, breaker, 1-9. You got your ears on. Yes, I do. Okay, what now? I don't know. Hadn't thought beyond that. Oh, because that's all I thought about. And it never went beyond that for the longest time, because all I had thought about was my experience of being able to press that button, and I could talk into it, and I could breaker 1-9, and I could call out, and I could have this experience. And it was all about me being able to do this, and I never thought beyond that moment. And because of never ever thinking beyond that moment, that's all I had. A little bit of breaker 1-9. So many times, with respect to our spiritual life, it is the case that we never, ever have meaningful experiences in what God desires to do and what Christ desires to accomplish through us never happens because we never get beyond thinking about ourselves. That initial encounter, okay, now I've got this, and I've got this relationship with you, okay, and all right, what now? What now? And it never gets beyond that. And I'm so distracted with just kind of thinking about me. The Pharisees and the Sadducees missed it. They came into this conversation, they had no interest, no plan whatsoever that Jesus might do something of consequence, that he might accomplish something of significance, because all they planned to do was to say breaker 1-9. That was it. That was all they intended, because they were thinking about themselves, and that was the extent of it. That same trap can befall us. I can be so easily distracted by me. I can also so easily be distracted by the moment. I can so easily also be distracted by the moment. Matthew tells us that the disciples at this point reach the other side of the shore. It seems that Jesus finishes this encounter with the religious leaders here. And Jesus, in verse 6, we're told the disciples, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. My take on this is that as he is leaving the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as that encounter ends, that's when he says this. So he is leaving them, and he says, guys, watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, consistently in the Old and New Testament, and repeatedly, you see use of the word leaven. Leaven, of course, is yeast. And when it's used, it's not most of the time talking about actual yeast in bread, but it's using that metaphor to convey the idea of corruption, which is to say that you're aware that it takes only a little bit of yeast, only a little bit of leaven to influence an entire loaf, much larger loaf of bread. And so he's saying, guys, I want you to watch out for that little bit of influence, that little bit of yeast, that little bit of leaven from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because it can have a permeating effect. But they hear that and it just goes right over their head. They get in the boat, they head the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and Matthew notes, before they even get in the boat, they had forgotten to take any bread. And so, verse 7, they were discussing among themselves, we didn't bring any bread. We didn't bring any bread. Now, given what follows, it seems that what is occurring is more than just a mere discussion. It is more that they are merely noting, we failed to put some biscuits in our pockets. It seems as though there is some anxious fret, as if to say, there is a real problem because we don't have anything to eat. What in the world are we going to do? We're here on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. There are no restaurants. There's not an easy place for us to be able to show up and get some food. And they're talking among themselves, and yet Jesus is aware of this, and pretty sternly he corrects them in verse 8, and he says to them, "You of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves that you don't have bread?" Now, on the surface, that sounds like it's kind of mean of Jesus. After all, they're asking a pretty reasonable question. Like if you and your family go somewhere, and let's say you plan to go hiking somewhere, and you wind up 3 miles up on a hill somewhere, and you'd plan to have a picnic, and you realize, oh, we didn't bring any lunch. And somebody says, well, what are we going to do? That sounds kind of reasonable to say, oh, we don't have anything to eat. It seems kind of reasonable for them to say, oh, we don't have anything to eat. But Jesus says, look at verse 9, don't you understand? And the operative term is that little word, yet. Don't you understand yet? Yet. For example, it is one thing for us to say with our youngest, John, to give him a book and for him to hold that book, perhaps upside down or sideways, and him to get no meaning out of that book unless there's some pictures and he might try to extrapolate some meaning out of that. The reason is because he's 5 years old and can't read yet. Now, if he is 16 years old and I hand him that book and it's still sideways or upside down, that's a problem. I'll say, can't you read yet? Don't you understand this yet? Which is to say, and Jesus is communicating, listen guys, there has been ample opportunity at this point. There has been a whole lot of teaching, a whole lot of learning opportunities, and guys, you still do not get it. And at this point, he says, don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you collected? Now, look in your Bibles for just a second and pay attention to the stuff that has just occurred. Now, as this chapter begins, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they demanded Jesus do something. Hey, we need a sign, and that comes on the heels of Jesus having fed the 4,000. That comes immediately on the heels of him having healed a stack of people on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, which occurs just after he has healed this woman's daughter based on her faith alone in the absence of the daughter's presence, which occurs on the heels of a stack of people being healed in the city of Gennesaret, or in the port town of Gennesaret. He had just walked on water, and then he had fed 5,000 people. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees say, how about giving us a sign? All right, so they're not paying attention, but the disciples, Jesus says, hey guys, don't you get it? And then he starts to review. He says, don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000? Well, what is that? That's back in chapter 14. You read that starting in verse 13. You remember the little boy has the sack lunch, so 5 loaves and 2 fish. So there's not just 5,000 people, it's 5,000 men, not counting women and children, so thousands of people. And Jesus says, how many baskets did you collect? He doesn't tell us here, but back in chapter 14 you read, they picked up 12 baskets full after people had stuffed themselves. They didn't just get a nibble, they had fed themselves. They ate until they were full, and there were still 12 baskets left over. Guys, don't you remember, you each got a basket to take home. And then he said, or the 7 loaves for the 4,000. So a slightly smaller crowd, but still there are 4,000 men, not counting women and children. And there were baskets left over from that. 7 large baskets left over from that. And he says, guys, why is it that you don't understand what I told you? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that I wasn't talking about bread. Like, at some point, guys, you need to be held accountable for the truth that you know. At some point, you've got to be held accountable for the truth that you have been exposed to. They had had this lengthy, up-close and personal, tangible demonstration of the power of Jesus. With effectively nothing, he had fed what they had observed were to be tens of thousands of people. Now there's just 12 of them, and they're like, we ain't got no bread. And Jesus is like, you still don't get it. You still do not get it. How is it that they don't get it? It's because of this. The disciples were not altogether different from us. And that is that you can be a follower of Christ for a long time. You can have a decades-long relationship with God where He can have done amazing, powerfully, wonderful things in your life. You can see Him restore a broken relationship. You can see Him bring miraculous, what you would believe to be miraculous healing into a circumstance. You can see God do amazing things with your finances and how you had no idea how the lights were going to stay on, and somehow, some way, God met the need. There's going to be all of these amazing things that you've seen God do, and how God brought the right person at the right time in your life just when you needed it. And then all of a sudden, there's a phone call that comes. There's a doctor that says something. There's something that comes out of the blue, and then all of a sudden you become Chicken Little, and you're like, I don't know what to do, and I'm so mad at God. And I've got to think that He's looking at us and saying, don't you get it? Don't you get it? Like, at some point, are you not going to pay attention to the stuff that you've learned? When is there going to be a cumulating effect or a cumulative effect of all that I have shown you? So that you'll start paying attention to the buildup of truth instead of paying attention to the need of the moment. And so they missed it because they're paying attention to the moment. Long story short, when I was a kid, another reason I was cool, I decided that I was going to make some bricks. And I'm sure most of you decided to do that at some point or the other. But it did not work, and I wound up with some big clods of clay. And in frustration, I began to bust them on the driveway so that there is dirt everywhere. My sister comes out and thinks that this looks pretty fun, and so she joins me in it, and there's dirt everywhere on the driveway. My dad comes out, thinks that it looks like it's less than fun and attractive, and demands that we begin to clean it up. So my sister has the broom, and she's probably, 30 feet away from me. I'm picking up some clods of dirt, and at this point, I decide that I need the broom. And so I call out to my sister, hey, toss me the broom. And so she does so without hesitation. And I vividly remember that she has thrown it, and it's in the air like a javelin. And there's a few brief seconds while it's in the air where in my little acorn-sized brain, I'm able to think. And the first thought was, as it's spiraling towards me, if I put my hand up, it's going to hurt my hand. And then I thought, if I turn around, it's going to hit me in the back, and that's going to hurt. And about that time, it struck me just under the eye and busted my face open. I had to get some stitches that night. And I look back on that instance, and I think, why didn't I just do this? Because I had done before. I'd stepped out of the way of stuff before. Things had been coming my way before. I'd played dodgeball before, and I had done this. But in the moment, all I could think about was and not paying attention to the lessons that had been learned. Listen, too many times we're exactly the same way in our walks with the Lord. And there are so many things that He has led us through. And He's led us through so that we might learn these things and grow from these things, that they might have a cumulative effect of maturing us so that we are prepared for the next thing that He leads us through. And so that when that next need, that next moment of adversity, that next mountain that we come up to as we approach that, we don't do so with fear and trepidation. We say, you know what? God has helped me in the past, and he operated in ways that I had no idea how that was going to work out, and so I can lean on and lean into Him in this. But too many times what we do is exactly what the disciples do. And we're so easily distracted by the moment. And we miss out. This could have been a great opportunity for them to see, again, Jesus do something significant. And instead of having that realized opportunity, what they got was a rebuke. This could have been an amazing opportunity for the Sadducees and the Pharisees, but all they could focus on was themselves. Listen, it may be even this past week or even in this moment or in this season of time right now in your life and in your walk with God, there are things that He is trying to do of significance and of real meaning. The question is, are these moments passing you by because you're so distracted? Distracted by yourself, distracted by the moment. Will you bow your heads with me?